Hello and welcome. My name is Tarmo Ramel and I have a short tutorial today about formatting and presenting tabular data. Undoubtedly you have seen numerous tables in your lifetimes. Some of them are really great and effective and some of them could use a little bit of polish. What I'd like to do is step through the example that I have currently on the screen. It is a table that was taken from a paper that I co-wrote back in 2005. The reference is there in the very bottom line, line 31 of the Excel sheet. And I'm going to take this raw version of the table and create something that makes it much more interpretable and also pleasing to look at. First thing I'm going to do here is note that there's a spelling mistake up here in the corner. So spelling mistakes, not really good if you want to bring credibility to your work. So let's go in here and quickly fix that spelling error. This should have a table number and a caption so that when we have to come back to this file, we can rework it and we know exactly what we're looking at. We may actually want to rename the tab at the bottom as table 3 and put it into the folder that all of the other data and tables for this project are stored within. But when we go to insert this table into the actual document or into the publication, then we should insert the captions properly and not have them embedded in the table that we bring in here from Excel. The next thing that we like to do is to separate the various columns with a very thin gap. It allows us to insert horizontal lines or rules that nicely and visually separate our data. So we actually have here two columns that pertain to NFI data. We have two columns that pertain to EOSD data and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, I'm going to hold down the control key and I'm going to insert another gap here. I'm going to right click and head on into insert, and it's going to insert some extra columns for us. I'm going to right click on this one, go to column width, and I'm going to put in 0.5, and notice that we now have a very narrow column here that separates these two columns from these two. I realize I need to put another column break in here, and what I will do is I will also change the column width here to be 0.5. I seemingly inserted this in the wrong location, so I'm simply going to delete that column and go over here, insert, right click, column width 0.5, and now we have the groups of two columns nicely separated. We also know that all of this material here are headings and it's not part of the table data itself. So let's offset from everything else in the table by making those bold and they stand out really nicely. We also know that this NFI title actually spans both of these columns, so we can use this merge and center button to place it nicely over the center, and we can do the same with the following row because both of these headings pertain to both columns, whereas the hectares and the percentage do not. We can do the same here for the EOSD, and for the second row we can do the same thing this column, do the same thing here. One of the big things with formatting tables is ensuring consistency so that when a user is observing the table that they become comfortable in seeing what you're showing them. One of the big issues here is that some of these data have no decimal place precision. Sometimes there are 3 decimal place precision, sometimes there are 1 decimal place precision, 2. We'd like to keep these all consistent, just so that everything just looks nice and uniform. Unless there's actually a reason for having different precision, everything in one column, or even in the entire table, should generally follow a set amount of precision. So in this case here, I know that the precision should all be down to 1 decimal place. So we can actually go and adjust with these buttons here the level of precision. We notice that everything now is set to 1 decimal place precision. We also have down here a series of totals. We can offset those from the rest of the table by making them bold as well. Now notice here that these headings are left justified, but the data here itself is numeric and is right justified. It always helps when the corresponding heading and the data are justified within the column consistently. So anything that is text-based should be left justified, as we have here with the heading category and these text data all left justified, so that it's very clear that this heading category aligns nicely with what is below it. We should also have a heading here, and perhaps this is number, and we should make it bold, but it should be right justified so that it aligns nicely with the numeric data in that column. Similarly, all of these should be right justified so that they align with the data in the corresponding columns. We can now draw a line. We're not going to simply use the default line. We're going to use a little arrow for the drop down. Head down to more borders. We're going to choose the thin border line, and we're going to place it across the bottom of the cells, and we're going to hit OK. Now when I click across, we can see that there's clearly material that's bolded that's above the line that are the headings, and then there's data that follows beneath that line. It's also great convention to begin and end our tables with a slightly thicker border. It visually offsets the data, or sort of the table itself, from the rest of our report. So we can choose the thicker line and put it here, oops, not there, at the top of the cells, and we hit OK. And notice that we now have a thicker line at the top. We should do the same thing at the bottom of our table. So again, we'll head over here to more borders. We're going to choose the thicker line. We're going to add it to the base. So we now have the top and the bottom of our table offset with a thick line. We have our headings in bold. At the base of all of the headings, we have a thin line, and our data has consistent precision. It has spelling mistakes fixed. There's an indication as to what the table number is. There's a caption, and all of the data are aligned properly in their cells. We can go a step further and select this cell here, hold down Control, and select each of those 4 columns, and we can add a thin line at the base of these cells as well, which help us to separate these double columns that pertain to the NFI and the EOSD, so that we look at the first one here. We have NFI data, total polygon area, and we provide it both in hectares and as a percentage, and then the data follows down through that table. Similarly, we have EOSD data, its total grid area in hectares and as a percentage, and the data follows there as well. It also makes sense to go here and add a thin line that simply tells us that, hey, the data is now complete, but anything that follows and that is given in bold is some sort of summary. And the total shouldn't be written out there. It should be in here because it doesn't actually have a number, which means that the categories make more sense. So this is a really good structure for a table. I'm going to zoom out just 1 second so that we can see it a little bit better. There are also notes that we may want to add to the base of this table. And these are things that help with the interpretation of what's in the table itself. They may relate to a specific cell or column or row of data, and using an asterisk we can then identify which element of the table it pertains to, and then we may also have the source for this data provided at the base of the table. Now this table was actually in the paper, so I don't need to cite the paper for the table, that's circular, but if this data came from a very specific source, we could provide the source at the base of this table as well, and now we have a clear representation that is easy to read, easy to interpret, and easy to take and import into any document that we're making. So keep these basic rules in mind. I've got some of them summarized here on the next page, and I'm going to show them to you very quickly. Up here at the top, it says table number and caption here for reference, but when we do put these into our actual document, that we should insert them as captions instead. Over here, we left justify text columns, and similarly we right justify columns that have numeric data, and we make sure that we have consistent numeric precision. We generally start and end our table with a thicker border, and we can offset various levels of the caption or the headings, the attribute names, with thin lines, and also separate the end of the data within the table from some sorts of summary values which are at the base. So really quite great. We could also insert these totals as equations so that if we ever went in and modify the table, everything would self-adapt and we don't have to go back and redo everything manually. And just looking at this table, there's one additional element that I would like to bring attention to improvement. And currently this data is shown in Calibri. Sometimes we see our data in sort of awkward fonts. So sometimes we see things like Times New Roman. And while this is a very common font, it is a serif font, and it has all sorts of little bits and pieces and squiggly areas, and the numbers aren't quite so crisp. So if we were to zoom in, we can see that each of these letters has a small tail sticking out. We have a little bit of stylized lettering. That's intended to allow our eye to travel from one letter to the next and helps us speed up our reading. Really useful when we're looking at novels. But if we're producing material for viewing on a presentation or in a document where we want just clear data with less stuff on it, I'm going to recommend that you always use a sans serif font, one that doesn't have those little quote-unquote doohickeys. So I'm just going to zoom out to here. I'm going to select the entire worksheet, and instead of Times New Roman, I am going to choose, let's say, Arial. You can choose whatever font pleases you the most. Often we choose our fonts based on what the journal or the publisher requires us to use, but in this setting everything is nice and clean. We notice that some of our columns are cutting off at this font size some of the text. So what I'm going to do is simply with the control key select the columns of interest, and I'm going to do them all at the same time so that I end up with columns that are equally sized and easy to look at. And then I'm simply going to drag that a little bit wider. And now everything, oh, we still have this one here that's not showing up properly. So let's make this a little bit bigger. And now we have a table that meets all of the requirements for presentation. Hope this was helpful. Hope this helps you make better graphs, or sorry, better tables. And talk to you next time.